Sarah Martinez had been saving for 3 years to buy her dream car. Every extra dollar from her job at the local medical clinic went into a special savings account labeled Mustang Fund. She worked overtime shifts, skipped weekend dinners out with friends, and even sold her grandmother's antique jewelry collection to finally afford the 2019 Ford Mustang GT in metallic blue that she'd been eyeing at the dealership. The day she drove it home to Willowbrook Estates, her heart raced with excitement. The neighborhood was upscale, filled with perfectly manicured lawns and expensive homes. Sarah had stretched her budget to afford even the smallest house here, but she believed it was worth it for the safety and prestige. She carefully parked her new Mustang in her driveway, making sure it was perfectly aligned and not blocking any walkways. Her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, waved from across the street. "Beautiful car, dear. You must be so proud." Sarah beamed with pride as she ran her hand along the smooth paint job. This car represented years of sacrifice and hard work, and she planned to take excellent care of it. The Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association was run by Richard Blackstone, a successful real estate developer who owned the largest house in the neighborhood. He was known for being strict about the community rules and took great pride in maintaining the area's high standards. His son, Kyle, was 22 years old and had never held a steady job. Richard had bought Kyle a brand new BMW for his birthday, hoping it might motivate him to be more responsible. Kyle Blackstone was the type of young man who had never faced real consequences for his actions. Throughout high school, his father's money and influence had gotten him out of trouble countless times. He'd crashed 2 previous cars, both times walking away while his father handled the insurance claims and legal issues. Kyle spent most of his days sleeping until noon, playing video games and hanging out with friends who were equally privileged and irresponsible. On a sunny Thursday morning in June, Sarah was getting ready for work when she heard a tremendous crash outside her bedroom window. The sound was so loud it shook the walls of her house. She rushed to look outside and saw the most devastating sight imaginable. Her beautiful blue Mustang was completely destroyed, crushed against her neighbor's brick mailbox. The front end was crumpled like an accordion. The windshield was shattered and steam was rising from the engine. Standing next to the wreckage was Kyle Blackstone, looking annoyed rather than concerned. He was on his phone, talking loudly to someone while gesturing at the destroyed vehicles. His BMW had also been damaged, but not nearly as severely as Sarah's Mustang. Sarah threw on her clothes and ran outside, her heart pounding with shock and disbelief. "What happened to my car?" she shouted, her voice shaking with emotion. Kyle looked at her with a dismissive expression, barely pausing his phone conversation. When he finally hung up, he shrugged his shoulders casually. "Your car was parked illegally," Kyle said matter-of-factly. "I was backing out of my driveway, and your car was blocking the sightline. It's really your fault for parking it there." Sarah stared at him in complete amazement. Her car had been properly parked in her own driveway, nowhere near Kyle's property. "My car was in my driveway," Sarah protested. "How could it be blocking anything when it was on my own property?" Kyle rolled his eyes and pulled out his phone again, acting as if Sarah was being unreasonable. "Look, lady, I've already called my dad and our lawyer. Your car was creating a hazard by being parked where people couldn't see around it. My dad says we have witnesses who will testify that your parking was dangerous." Sarah felt like she was living in an alternate reality. Kyle was standing next to her completely destroyed car, claiming that she was somehow responsible for him crashing into it. Neighbors began gathering around the scene of the accident. Mrs. Henderson came over with a concerned expression, while several other residents stood on their lawns whispering among themselves. Sarah noticed that some of them looked sympathetic, but others seemed to be avoiding eye contact with her. Within minutes, Richard Blackstone arrived in his expensive Mercedes. He was a tall, imposing man in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit, even though it was still early morning. He immediately went to check on Kyle, barely acknowledging Sarah or her destroyed car. "Is everything all right, son?" Richard asked, putting his arm around Kyle's shoulders. "Are you hurt? Should we call a doctor?" Kyle shook his head and pointed towards Sarah's Mustang. "I'm fine, Dad, but look what happened. I told you that car was going to cause an accident eventually. It was parked in a blind spot, and I couldn't see when I was backing out." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Father and son were both acting as if she had somehow caused this accident. "Excuse me, Mr. Blackstone," Sarah interrupted, trying to keep her voice steady. "Your son crashed into my car while it was parked in my own driveway. I need to know how you're going to handle the insurance claim and repairs." Richard Blackstone looked at her with the same dismissive expression as his son. "Young lady, I think. You're confused about what happened here," Richard said in a condescending tone. "My son was backing out of our driveway when your improperly parked vehicle caused this collision. We'll be filing a claim against your insurance for the damage to Kyle's car and any medical expenses he might incur." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Not only was her dream car completely destroyed, but the Blackstones were actually trying to blame her for the accident and make her pay for Kyle's damages. She looked around at the gathered neighbors, hoping someone would speak up as a witness to support her version of events. The police arrived shortly after, and Sarah hoped they would straighten out this bizarre situation. Officer Martinez took statements from both parties and measured the accident scene. However, when Richard Blackstone approached the officer privately, Sarah noticed them having a long conversation away from everyone else. When Officer Martinez returned to complete his report, his demeanor toward Sarah had noticeably changed. He seemed less sympathetic and more skeptical of her account of the accident. Sarah realized with growing horror that Richard Blackstone's influence extended even to the local police department. As the tow truck loaded her destroyed Mustang, Sarah stood in her driveway feeling completely alone and overwhelmed. Her dream car was gone, the Blackstones were blaming her for the accident, and it seemed like no one was willing to stand up for the truth. She had no idea that this was just the beginning of a much larger battle that would test everything she believed about justice and fairness. The next morning, Sarah woke up hoping the previous day had been a terrible nightmare. But when she looked out her bedroom window, she saw the oil stains on her driveway where her beloved Mustang had been parked. The reality hit her all over, again, and she felt sick to her stomach. She called her insurance company first thing in the morning, expecting them to handle the claim professionally. The representative, Jennifer, seemed sympathetic at first as Sarah explained how Kyle Blackstone had crashed into her parked car. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," Jennifer said. "We'll start processing your claim right away. However, I need to let you know that the other party has already filed a claim against you, stating that your parking created a hazardous condition that caused the accident." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. "My car was parked legally in my own driveway. How can they possibly claim I caused the accident?" Jennifer explained that both insurance companies would investigate the incident and determine fault based on the evidence and witness statements. "The other party has provided several witness statements supporting their version of events," Jennifer continued. "They claim your car was parked in such a way that it blocked visibility for drivers backing out of nearby driveways." Sarah felt her heart sinking. What witnesses? "I was inside my house when the accident happened, but my car was definitely parked properly." She realized she needed to gather her own evidence and witness statements to fight back against these false accusations. After hanging up with her insurance company, Sarah decided to walk around the neighborhood and talk to people who might have seen the accident. She started with Mrs. Henderson, who had always been friendly and had complimented her car just the day before. When Sarah knocked on Mrs. Henderson's door, the older woman seemed nervous and uncomfortable. "Oh, hello, dear," she said, barely opening the door. "I heard about the accident yesterday. Such a shame." "Mrs. Henderson, you were outside when it happened," Sarah said hopefully. "Could you tell me what you saw? I'm trying to get witness statements for my insurance company." Mrs. Henderson looked around nervously as if she was afraid someone might overhear their conversation. "Well, I'm not really sure what I saw," she said hesitantly. "Everything happened so fast, and I was quite far away." Sarah was confused. She clearly remembered Mrs. Henderson standing nearby right after the accident happened. "You came over right after the crash occurred. You must have seen something." "I'm sorry, dear, but I don't think I can help you," Mrs. Henderson said, starting to close the door. "Maybe you should talk to the Blackstones about working something out privately." As the door closed, Sarah stood on the porch feeling more alone than ever. She couldn't understand why Mrs. Henderson was suddenly acting so strange and unwilling to help. She decided to try talking to other neighbors who lived nearby. The pattern continued with every house she visited. Neighbors who had previously been friendly and welcoming were now cold and distant. Some refused to answer their doors altogether, while others claimed they hadn't seen anything and couldn't help with witness statements. At the Williams house, Mr. Williams actually seemed angry with Sarah. "Look, I don't want to get involved in any neighborhood drama," he said firmly. "The Blackstones are good people and Richard does a lot for this community. Maybe you should think about whether you really want to make a big fuss over this." Sarah was starting to understand that something much bigger was happening. It seemed like the entire neighborhood was closing ranks to protect the Blackstones, leaving her completely isolated and without support. That afternoon, she received a phone call from a law office representing the Blackstone family. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, spoke in a smooth, professional tone that somehow managed to sound threatening at the same time. "Ms. Martinez, I'm calling regarding the unfortunate incident involving my client's son and your vehicle," he began. "My clients are prepared to be reasonable about this situation, but only if you're willing to cooperate." "Cooperate with what?" Sarah asked, feeling increasingly frustrated. "Your client's son crashed into my parked car and destroyed it. I don't understand what I'm supposed to cooperate with." "My clients have evidence that your parking practices created a dangerous situation that led directly to this accident, Mr. A." Harrison continued. "However, they're willing to overlook any potential legal action against you if you're willing to accept responsibility and handle this matter through your own insurance." Sarah felt like she was trapped in some kind of alternate universe where nothing made sense. "I'm not accepting responsibility for something I didn't do. My car was legally parked in my own driveway." "I understand you're upset," Mr. Harrison said in a patronizing tone. "But I should warn you that fighting this could become very expensive and time-consuming for you. My clients have substantial resources and multiple witnesses who will testify that your parking was negligent. It might be in your best interest to reconsider your position." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her empty living room feeling completely overwhelmed. She was facing a legal and financial battle she couldn't afford against people with unlimited resources and apparent influence over the entire neighborhood. That evening, she received an unexpected visit from Richard Blackstone himself. He arrived at her door wearing an expensive suit and carrying a folder of documents. "Ms. Martinez, I hope you don't mind me stopping by," he said with a fake smile. "I wanted to discuss this unfortunate situation personally, neighbor to neighbor." "I'm listening," Sarah said, crossing her arms and remaining in her doorway. "I think we both want to resolve this matter quickly and quietly," Richard continued. "I'm prepared to make you a generous offer. My insurance company will pay for half of your car's repairs, even though the accident was caused by your parking. In exchange, you drop any claims against my son and agree not to discuss this incident with other neighbors or the media." Sarah stared at him in amazement. "Half the repairs. Your son totaled my car completely, and now you're trying to buy my silence." Richard's friendly expression hardened slightly. "I'm trying to be reasonable here, but if you prefer to handle this through lawyers and insurance companies, that's certainly your choice. Just remember that this is a small community, and people have long memories." The implied threat was clear. If Sarah didn't accept Richard's offer and drop her claims, she would face ongoing retaliation from the most powerful man in the neighborhood. She was beginning to realize that the Blackstones weren't just wealthy and connected. They were willing to use their influence to destroy anyone who stood up to them. After Richard left, Sarah called her sister Maria, who lived across town. Through tears, she explained everything that had happened over the past 2 days. "This is insane," Maria said angrily. "You can't let them get away with this. Have you considered calling the local news stations? Maybe some media attention would help people find the courage to tell the truth." Sarah had been thinking the same thing, but she was also worried about making the situation worse. "I'm scared, Maria. It feels like the entire neighborhood is against me and I can't afford a long legal battle." "You can't afford not to fight back," Maria replied firmly. "If you let them get away with this, they'll just do it to someone else. And you worked too hard for that car to let them destroy it and blame you for it." That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to decide what to do next. She could accept Richard's offer, take partial compensation for her car, and try to move on with her life. Or she could fight back against a powerful family that seemed to control everything and everyone in Willowbrook Estates. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah made her decision. She wasn't going to let the Blackstones destroy her life and get away with it. Tomorrow she would start fighting back no matter what the consequences might be. Sarah woke up the next morning with renewed determination. She had spent the night researching her legal options and discovered that she had more rights than the Blackstones wanted her to believe. Her first stop was the police station to request a copy of the official accident report. At the police station, the desk sergeant seemed reluctant to help her. "The report isn't ready yet," he said without looking up from his computer. "It usually takes a week or two to process these things." "Officer Martinez told me yesterday that he was filing the report immediately," Sarah replied firmly. "I have a right to a copy for my insurance company." The sergeant finally looked up at her with an annoyed expression. "Look, lady, these things take time. Why don't you call back next week?" Sarah realized that even the police department was trying to stall her. She decided to try a different approach. "I'd like to speak with Officer Martinez directly. I have some additional information about the accident that I need to add to his report." After waiting for 20 minutes, Officer Martinez finally appeared, looking uncomfortable. "Ms. Martinez, what additional information do you have?" "I want to make sure my statement was recorded accurately," Sarah said. "And I'd like to know if you measured the distance from my driveway to the Blackstone property." Officer Martinez shifted uncomfortably. "The measurements are all in the report. Like I said, it'll be ready next week." He started to walk away, but Sarah called after him. "Officer Martinez, why didn't you take photographs of the accident scene?" she asked. "Isn't that standard procedure for property damage accidents?" The officer stopped and turned back to her, looking irritated. "We took all the necessary documentation. If you have concerns about the investigation, you can file a complaint with my supervisor." Sarah left the police station feeling more convinced than ever that something wasn't right. She decided to take her own photographs of the accident scene and her driveway to document the actual parking situation. When she arrived back at her house, she was shocked to find Kyle Blackstone's damaged BMW parked in her driveway. Kyle was standing nearby with two of his friends, all of them laughing about something. "What are you doing in my driveway?" Sarah demanded, walking up to the group. Kyle looked at her with the same dismissive expression he'd had the day of the accident. "My car needs some body work done, and your driveway has better lighting than ours," Kyle said casually. "Since your car isn't here anymore, I figured you wouldn't mind." Sarah couldn't believe the audacity. "Get your car out of my driveway right now. You have no right to park on my property." Kyle's friends snickered, and one of them spoke up. "Chill out, lady. It's just a parking spot. Kyle's dad practically owns this whole neighborhood anyway." "I don't care who his father is," Sarah said, pulling out her phone. "If you don't move your car immediately, I'm calling the police to have it towed." Kyle finally got into his BMW and backed out of her driveway, but not before rolling his window down. "You're making a big mistake fighting my family," he said with a smirk. "You should have taken my dad's offer when you had the chance." After Kyle left, Sarah spent an hour taking detailed photographs of her driveway and the surrounding area. She measured the distances to nearby properties and documented that her driveway was completely separate from the Blackstone property with no sightline issues whatsoever. That afternoon, she drove to 3 different auto body shops to get estimates for repairing her Mustang. The news was devastating. All 3 shops told her the car was a total loss, with damage exceeding the vehicle's value. The cheapest estimate was $18,000 more than she had paid for the car originally. "I'm sorry," said Mike, the owner of Tony's Auto Body. "The frame is bent, the engine block is cracked, and there's damage to pretty much every major system. It would cost more to fix than the car is worth." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. Her dream car was truly gone forever, and she was facing thousands of dollars in losses. But Mike noticed her distress and lowered his voice. "Look, I don't usually get involved in customer disputes," he said quietly. "But I've heard some things about this accident around town. If you're thinking about fighting back, you should know that some people are talking." "What kind of things?" Sarah asked hopefully. There's a guy named Pete who works construction in your neighborhood. He was doing some roofing work the morning of your accident. You might want to talk to him. He works for Martinez Construction, no relation to you, I assume." Sarah's heart leaped with hope. Finally, she might have found an independent witness who wasn't intimidated by the Blackstones. She got Pete's contact information from Mike and called him immediately. Pete Rodriguez was a soft-spoken man in his 40s who had been working construction for 20 years. When Sarah explained why she was calling, he agreed to meet with her that evening at a coffee shop away from Willowbrook Estates. "I was on the roof of the Henderson house that morning installing some gutters," Pete explained. "I had a perfect view of your driveway and the accident." Sarah felt her pulse quickening. "What did you see?" "Your car was parked normally in your driveway, nowhere near the property line," Pete said firmly. "That kid came flying out of his driveway, way too fast and lost control. He crashed right into your car while it was sitting still. Would you be willing to give a statement to the insurance companies?" Sarah asked hopefully. Pete looked uncomfortable. "I want to help you, but I need to be careful. The Blackstones have a lot of influence in this town, and I can't afford to lose work contracts. But I'll tell the truth if I'm officially asked." Sarah felt like crying with relief. Finally, she had found someone willing to tell the truth about what really happened. Pete gave her his contact information and promised to provide a witness statement if she needed it for legal proceedings. That evening, Sarah called her insurance company to provide them with Pete's contact information and her photographic evidence. Jennifer, her claims representative, sounded more optimistic than she had before. "This witness testimony could be very helpful," Jennifer said. "We'll contact him tomorrow to get his official statement. In the meantime, I need to let you know that the other party's insurance company has been pressuring us to settle quickly and assign fault to you." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked. "It means they're worried about something," Jennifer replied. "Insurance companies don't usually push for quick settlements unless they think their client is actually at fault. Your evidence might be stronger than they want us to believe." Before going to bed, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Mrs. Chen, another neighbor she had tried to speak with earlier. "I've been thinking about what happened to you," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "I didn't see the accident, but I want you to know that not everyone in the neighborhood agrees with how the Blackstones are handling this." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "Richard Blackstone called a meeting of the HOA board yesterday," Mrs. Chen explained. "He's trying to get support from other homeowners to pressure you into dropping your claims. But some of us think Kyle is a spoiled brat who needs to face consequences for his actions." This revelation gave Sarah hope that she wasn't completely alone in her fight. Even though most of her neighbors were afraid to speak out publicly, some of them were beginning to question the Blackstones' version of events. "Mrs. Chen, would you be willing to attend any meetings where they're discussing my situation?" Sarah asked. "I can't speak out directly," Mrs. Chen replied, "but I can make sure you know what they're planning. Knowledge is power, and you're going to need all the help you can get." As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized that the battle was just beginning. The Blackstones had wealth, influence, and connections throughout the community. But Sarah had something they didn't expect: the truth, and a growing number of people who were tired of watching them abuse their power. Tomorrow, she would take the next step in fighting back against their lies and intimidation. She was no longer just fighting for compensation for her car. She was fighting for justice and the principle that wealthy, powerful people shouldn't be able to destroy other people's lives without consequences. The following Monday morning brought unexpected developments that would change everything in Sarah's fight against the Blackstones. She was getting ready for work when her phone rang. It was Jennifer from her insurance company, and she sounded excited. "Sarah, we interviewed your witness, Pete Rodriguez, yesterday afternoon," Jennifer said. "His statement completely contradicts the Blackstone family's version of events. He was very detailed and credible." "That's wonderful news," Sarah replied, feeling hopeful for the first time in days. "What happens next?" "We're reopening our investigation and demanding that the other insurance company provide additional evidence to support their client's claims," Jennifer explained. "Pete's testimony is so compelling that we're now questioning whether the police report was accurate." This news gave Sarah the courage to take her next step. She had been considering contacting the local news station, and now seemed like the perfect time. She called Channel 7 News and spoke with a reporter named David Kim, who specialized in consumer advocacy stories. "This sounds like exactly the kind of story our viewers care about," David said after Sarah explained the situation. "A working person gets their dream car destroyed by a wealthy family's son and then gets blamed for the accident? I'd like to investigate this further." David arranged to meet Sarah that afternoon to conduct an on-camera interview. He also planned to approach the Blackstones for their side of the story, which made Sarah both nervous and excited. Meanwhile, Pete Rodriguez had been having second thoughts about getting involved. He called Sarah that morning sounding worried. "I gave my statement to the insurance company like I promised," Pete said, "but now I'm hearing that the Blackstones are asking around about who I am and who I work for. I'm concerned they might try to hurt my business." "I understand you're scared," Sarah replied, "but your testimony is the only thing standing between me and losing everything. The truth matters, Pete." "I know it does," Pete said with a sigh. "I'll stick with my story because it's the truth, but I wanted you to know what we're up against." That afternoon, Sarah met David Kim at a park near Willowbrook Estates for the interview. David was the experienced reporter in his 30s, who had a reputation for taking on powerful people who tried to bully ordinary citizens. "Tell me about your car and what it meant to you," David began, camera rolling. Sarah explained how she had saved for years, worked overtime shifts, and sacrificed social activities to afford her dream Mustang. "It wasn't just a car to me," she said, fighting back tears. "It represented 3 years of hard work and sacrifice. When I finally drove it home, I felt like I had achieved something really important." David then asked her to describe the accident and the aftermath. As Sarah recounted Kyle's dismissive attitude, Richard's threats, and the neighborhood's strange behavior, David's expressions showed his growing interest in the story. "The most frustrating part is how they're trying to make me accept blame for something I clearly didn't do," Sarah explained. "Kyle crashed into my parked car, but somehow I'm supposed to pay for his damages and accept that my car is gone forever." After completing Sarah's interview, David drove to the Blackstone house to request their side of the story. He rang the doorbell and was greeted by Richard Blackstone, who immediately became hostile when David identified himself as a reporter. "We have no comment about any alleged incident," Richard said firmly. "This is a private matter being handled through appropriate legal channels. Mr. Blackstone, your son was involved in an accident that destroyed another person's vehicle," David pressed. "Don't you think the public has a right to know how you're handling the situation?" "I'm not discussing anything with the media," Richard replied angrily. "And I strongly advise you not to broadcast any story based on false accusations against my family." David could see Kyle in the background, lounging on an expensive sofa and playing video games, apparently unconcerned about the situation. "Is your son available to comment on the accident?" "This interview is over," Richard said, slamming the door in David's face. That evening, Sarah received a phone call that changed everything. It was from a woman named Lisa Parker, who identified herself as Kyle's ex-girlfriend. "I saw the news. Van at the Blackstone house today," Lisa said nervously. "I heard you're fighting back against what Kyle did to your car." "Yes, I am," Sarah replied carefully, not sure what to expect. "I need to tell you something," Lisa continued. "Kyle has been bragging to his friends about the accident. He thinks it's funny that he destroyed your car and that his dad is making you pay for it." Sarah felt her anger rising. "What exactly has he been saying?" "He told everyone at a party last weekend that he was speeding and texting when the accident happened," Lisa revealed. "He said he was trying to beat his previous record for backing out of his driveway at high speed. He never even saw your car until he hit it." This revelation was exactly what Sarah needed to prove that Kyle had been lying about the accident. "Lisa, would you be willing to tell this to the insurance companies or the police?" "I'm scared of what Richard Blackstone might do to me," Lisa admitted. "But I've been watching Kyle get away with terrible behavior for 2 years, and I'm tired of it. He needs to face consequences for once in his life." Lisa agreed to provide a written statement about Kyle's admissions, which would be crucial evidence in Sarah's case. She also revealed that Kyle had been involved in several previous accidents that his father had covered up through legal settlements. and insurance manipulation. The next morning brought even more unexpected support. Mrs. Chen called to tell Sarah about a heated argument she had overheard between Richard and Kyle Blackstone in their backyard. Kyle was complaining that his BMW still isn't fixed, and Richard was yelling at him about being careless and creating problems for the family, Mrs. Chen reported. Richard said something about cleaning up your messes like always and warned Kyle to keep his mouth shut about what really happened. This conversation suggested that Richard knew his son was lying about the accident and was actively participating in the cover-up. Combined with Pete's eyewitness testimony and Lisa's revelations about Kyle's bragging, Sarah's case was becoming much stronger. David Kim called Sarah that afternoon with more good news. "I've been doing some research on the Blackstone family," he said. "This isn't the first time they've been involved in situations like this. I found 3 other incidents over the past 5 years where Kyle was involved in accidents or property damage, and his father made the problems disappear through legal pressure and financial settlements." "So this is a pattern of behavior?" Sarah asked. "Exactly, and I think our story is going to be much bigger than just your car accident. This is about a wealthy family that thinks they can buy their way out of any consequences for their son's reckless behavior." The Channel 7 news story was scheduled to air that Thursday evening during the primetime newscast. David had put together a comprehensive report that included Sarah's interview, Pete's eyewitness account, Lisa's revelations about Kyle's bragging, and background information about the Blackstone family's history of covering up Kyle's mistakes. As Thursday approached, Sarah felt both nervous and hopeful. She knew that once the story aired, there would be no turning back. The Blackstones would likely escalate their retaliation against her, but she was tired of being bullied and intimidated. The night before the story was scheduled to air, Sarah received one final phone call from Richard Blackstone. His tone was different this time, less confident and more desperate. "Ms. Martinez, I understand you've been talking to reporters," Richard said. "I want to make you a final offer to resolve this matter privately. I'm prepared to pay the full value of your car plus an additional $10,000 for your inconvenience. All you have to do is agree not to cooperate with any media coverage." Sarah felt a moment of temptation. The money would solve her immediate problems and allow her to replace her car, but then she thought about Pete risking his livelihood to tell the truth, Lisa finding the courage to speak out against Kyle's behavior, and all the other people who might become victims if the Blackstones weren't held accountable. "Mr. Blackstone, your offer doesn't include an apology or any admission that your son was wrong," Sarah replied, "and it doesn't prevent you from doing this to someone else in the future." "Don't be foolish," Richard warned, his voice becoming harder. "Once that news story airs, you'll have made an enemy of the most powerful family in this community. You'll regret this decision." "Maybe," Sarah said calmly. "But at least I'll be able to sleep at night knowing I stood up for what's right." She hung up the phone. Sarah realized that tomorrow would bring the biggest test of her life. The news story would expose the Blackstone family's behavior to the entire community, but it would also make her a target for their retaliation. Whatever happened next, she was determined to see this fight through to the end. Thursday evening arrived with an atmosphere of nervous anticipation that Sarah could feel in every fiber of her being. She had invited her sister Maria and a few close friends to watch the Channel 7 news story together at her house. As 6:30 p.m. approached, Sarah felt her hands shaking as she held the television remote. "Coming up next," the news anchor announced, "a local woman fights back after a wealthy family tries to blame her for an accident that destroyed her dream car. David Kim has this exclusive investigation." Sarah's heart pounded as David Kim appeared, on screen standing in front of the Blackstone mansion. "Good evening. This is a story about power, privilege, and what happens when ordinary people refuse to be bullied by those who think their wealth makes them untouchable." The story began with Sarah's emotional interview about saving for her Mustang and the devastating moment when she discovered it had been destroyed. David had edited the piece expertly, showing the oil stains in her driveway and the photographs she had taken of the accident scene. But according to the wealthy family involved in this accident, Sarah Martinez is the one at fault, David continued. The story then showed his confrontation with Richard Blackstone, including Richard's hostile refusal to comment and his threat about false accusations. The most powerful moment came when David interviewed Pete Rodriguez, who spoke clearly and confidently about what he had witnessed from the rooftop that morning. The young man came flying out of that driveway at high speed, Pete said directly to the camera. He wasn't paying attention and he crashed right into her parked car. There was no way that car was blocking anything or creating any kind of hazard. David's investigation had uncovered even more than Sarah expected. The story revealed Kyle's history of reckless driving incidents and his father's pattern of using wealth and influence to avoid consequences. Most damaging of all was Lisa Parker's interview, where she described Kyle's bragging about the accident. He thought it was hilarious that he destroyed someone's car and his dad was going to make her pay for it, Lisa said, her face partially obscured to protect her identity. He said he was speeding and texting when it happened, but his father told him to blame the victim instead. The story concluded with David standing in front of Sarah's house, delivering a powerful summary. This case raises serious questions about justice and accountability in our community. When wealthy families can pressure police, intimidate witnesses, and blame victims for their children's reckless behavior, what hope do ordinary citizens have for fair treatment? As the story ended, Sarah's living room erupted in cheers and applause from her friends and family. Maria hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you for fighting back," Maria said. "That was an amazing piece of journalism." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror. The truth was finally out there for everyone to see, but she knew the Blackstones would not take this public humiliation quietly. Her phone began ringing immediately after the story ended. The first call was from Jennifer at her insurance company. "Sarah, that news story was incredible. We're using it as evidence to completely reverse our position on your claim." The other insurance company called us an hour ago wanting to settle immediately. Other calls poured in throughout the evening. Neighbors who had previously avoided her were now calling to apologize and offer support. Several said they had been afraid to speak out against the Blackstones but were inspired by Sarah's courage. Mrs. Henderson called, crying as she spoke. "I'm so sorry I didn't help you before," she said. "Richard Blackstone told several of us that if we supported you, he would use his position as HOA president to make our lives difficult. I was scared of losing my home." Even more surprising was a call from Officer Martinez at the police department. "Ms. Martinez, I need to speak with you tomorrow about amending the accident report," he said quietly. "After seeing that news story, I realized there may have been some irregularities in how this case was handled. But the most satisfying call came from David Kim himself. "Sarah, Channel 7's phone has been ringing nonstop since the story aired. People are outraged about how you've been treated. This story is getting picked up by other news outlets, and I think it's going to have a much bigger impact than we expected. However, not all the attention was positive." Around 10 p.m., Sarah noticed several cars driving slowly past her house. One of them stopped in front of her driveway, and she could see someone taking photographs of her property. Her phone rang again, but this time the caller ID showed unknown number. When she answered, a man's voice spoke in a threatening tone. "You made a big mistake going on TV," the voice said. "Some people don't like having their dirty laundry aired in public. You better watch yourself." Sarah hung up immediately and called the police to report the threatening call. The dispatcher assured her that a patrol car would drive by her house several times during the night. The next morning brought a flood of developments that exceeded even Sarah's wildest expectations. The Channel 7 story had been shared thousands of times on social media, with overwhelming support for Sarah and condemnation of the Blackstone family's behavior. Local talk radio stations were discussing the story, and several callers shared their own experiences of being bullied or intimidated by wealthy, powerful families in similar situations. The story was resonating with people far beyond Sarah's immediate community. David Kim called with exciting news. "Sarah, we've been contacted by 3 other families who say Richard Blackstone has used similar tactics against them over the years. They're ready to go public with their stories." One of these families was the Johnsons, whose teenage daughter had been in a minor fender bender with Kyle 2 years earlier. Richard had threatened to sue them for everything they owned unless they accepted full responsibility and paid for Kyle's car repairs, even though Kyle had been clearly at fault. Another was an elderly couple named the Garcias, who had been pressured to sell their house below market value after Richard claimed their property was bringing down neighborhood values and threatened expensive legal action if they didn't comply. The third family was the most shocking case of all. The Thompsons' son had been seriously injured in a hit-and-run accident 3 years earlier. They had suspected Kyle was the driver but couldn't prove it because witnesses were too afraid to come forward, and the police investigation was mysteriously closed quickly. With your story breaking the ice, these families finally feel safe enough to speak out, David explained. We're looking at a pattern of abuse that goes back years. Sarah was amazed that her fight for justice over her destroyed car had uncovered what appeared to be a systematic campaign of bullying and intimidation by the Blackstone family. That afternoon brought the most unexpected development yet. Richard Blackstone's business partner and longtime friend Robert Chen contacted David Kim with explosive information. I've been Richard's friend for 20 years, but I can't stay silent anymore, Robert said in an emotional interview. Kyle is completely out of control, and Richard enables his behavior by covering up every mistake. I've watched them destroy innocent families, and it needs to stop. Robert revealed that Richard had been using his real estate business connections to pressure banks, insurance companies, and even city officials to help cover up Kyle's various incidents. He had detailed records of payments made to settle claims quietly, and evidence of Richard's efforts to intimidate witnesses and victims. Richard keeps detailed files on everyone in the community, Robert explained. He uses personal information and financial leverage to control people. Sarah Martinez is just the latest victim, but she's the first person brave enough to fight back publicly. As these revelations continued to unfold, Sarah realized that her simple fight for justice had grown into something much larger. She was no longer just seeking compensation for her destroyed Mustang. She had become the catalyst for exposing years of abuse and corruption that had affected countless families. The Blackstones had built their power on fear and intimidation, but Sarah's courage in standing up to them had finally given other victims the strength to speak out. The truth was emerging after years of being buried under threats and bribes, and there was no way to stop it now. That evening, as Sarah watched the follow-up story about the other families, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Her beloved Mustang was still gone, but its destruction had led to something far more important than any car. She had helped expose a system of abuse and given voice to people who had been silenced for too long. The battle was far from over. But for the first time, since the accident, Sarah felt like she was winning. The following weeks brought a cascade of consequences that completely transformed the landscape of Willowbrook Estates and the surrounding community. Sarah had become an unwitting symbol of resistance against powerful bullies, and the momentum behind her story continued to build with each passing day. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation into the Blackstone family's activities after receiving dozens of complaints from victims who had previously been too afraid to speak out. Detective Lisa Warren was assigned to lead the investigation, and she contacted Sarah personally to gather evidence. Your courage in going public has opened the floodgates, Detective Warren explained during their meeting. We're looking at potential charges including witness intimidation, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The investigation revealed that Richard Blackstone had been systematically abusing his position as HOA president to gather personal information about neighbors, which he then used for leverage and intimidation. He had been pressuring local businesses to deny services to people who opposed him and had even influenced job opportunities for some residents. Kyle's driving record, which had been mysteriously clean despite multiple accidents, was found to contain falsified information. The police department's internal affairs division discovered that certain officers had been receiving substantial donations to their retirement fund from Richard's business interests. Most shocking of all was the discovery that Kyle had indeed been the hit-and-run driver who had injured the Thompson family's son 3 years earlier. New witnesses came forward after seeing the news coverage, and forensic evidence that had been overlooked during the original investigation suddenly became relevant again. Sarah's insurance company not only agreed to pay the full replacement value of her Mustang, but also offered her an additional settlement for the emotional distress she had suffered. The other insurance company dropped all claims against her and issued a public apology for their handling of the case. "We deeply regret that our client's false statements led to additional trauma for Ms. Martinez during an already difficult time," the insurance company's statement read. "We are implementing new procedures to prevent similar situations in the future." The ripple effects extended far beyond Sarah's individual case. Channel 7's continued coverage of the Blackstone scandal led to a broader investigation into corruption and influence peddling in local government. Several city council members who had received donations from Richard's business interests found themselves under scrutiny. The Willowbrook Estates HOA held an emergency meeting to remove Richard as president and implement new transparency requirements for board decisions. Mrs. Chen was elected as the new president, running on a platform of accountability and fair treatment for all residents. "We're going to make sure that wealth and influence never again determine how people are treated in our community," Mrs. Chen announced at her first board meeting. "Every resident deserves equal protection and fair treatment, regardless of their economic status." Kyle Blackstone's legal troubles mounted quickly. He was charged with hit-and-run driving in the Thompson case, reckless driving in Sarah's case, and multiple counts of insurance fraud for making false statements. His driver's license was suspended indefinitely, and he faced the possibility of several years in prison. For the first time in his life, Kyle could not rely on his father's money and influence to escape consequences. Richard's own legal problems prevented him from mounting an effective defense for his son, and Kyle was forced to accept a plea agreement that included jail time and substantial financial restitution to his victims. Sarah attended Kyle's sentencing hearing, not out of spite but because she wanted to see justice finally served. Kyle looked pale and frightened as he stood before the judge, a stark contrast to the arrogant young man who had blamed her for his own reckless driving. "Mr. Blackstone, your actions have caused tremendous harm to multiple families in this community," Judge Martinez said sternly. "Your privilege and your father's wealth will not protect you from the consequences of your choices." Kyle was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, 5 years of probation, and ordered to pay full restitution to all of his victims. He was also required to perform community service and attend anger management and substance abuse counseling. Richard Blackstone's legal troubles were even more severe. He was charged with multiple felonies including witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. His real estate business collapsed as clients fled and business partners distanced themselves from the scandal. The once powerful man who had terrorized his neighbors with threats and intimidation was now facing bankruptcy and potential prison time. His expensive house went into foreclosure and his reputation in the community was completely destroyed. "Justice moves slowly sometimes, but it does move," Detective Warren told Sarah as they watched Richard being led away in handcuffs after his arrest. "Your willingness to stand up to them made all of this possible." Pete Rodriguez, who had risked his livelihood to tell the truth, found himself with more work than he could handle as community members sought to support the honest contractor who had shown such courage. His business grew significantly, and he was able to hire additional workers to meet the demand. Lisa Parker, Kyle's ex-girlfriend who had revealed his bragging about the accident, received protection from the district attorney's office and eventually testified as a key witness in multiple cases. Her bravery in speaking out helped ensure that Kyle's victims received justice. Mrs. Henderson and other neighbors who had initially been too afraid to support Sarah made efforts to rebuild their relationships with her. Many of them volunteered to help with community activities and worked to create a more supportive neighborhood environment. "I learned that staying silent in the face of injustice makes you complicit in that injustice," Mrs. Henderson told Sarah during a neighborhood barbecue. "I'll never make that mistake again." Sarah used part of her insurance settlement to purchase a new Mustang, but this one meant even more to her than the original. It represented not just her hard work and sacrifice, but also her courage in standing up for what was right, despite overwhelming pressure to stay silent. The new car was metallic red instead of blue, and Sarah had a small plaque made for the dashboard that read, "Truth Prevails." Every time she drove through Willowbrook Estates, she was reminded that ordinary people could stand up to powerful bullies and win. David Kim's reporting on the Blackstone scandal earned him a regional journalism award and led to a promotion at Channel 7. He continued to investigate corruption and abuse of power, often crediting Sarah's story as the inspiration for his more aggressive approach to watchdog journalism. Sarah Martinez showed me that sometimes the biggest stories come from the smallest acts of courage, David said during his acceptance speech. When ordinary people refuse to be silenced by the powerful, amazing things can happen. The Blackstone scandal became a case study in several law schools and journalism programs, illustrating how individual courage can expose systematic corruption and abuse. Sarah was invited to speak at community groups and civic organizations about the importance of standing up for justice. A year after the accident that destroyed her first Mustang, Sarah drove her new car to the Willowbrook Estates Community Center for a town hall meeting about preventing future abuse of power. The parking lot was full of neighbors who had come to discuss new policies and procedures to ensure transparency and accountability. As she walked into the meeting, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed. She had lost her dream car, but she had gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that she had the strength to fight for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. The little blue Mustang that had been destroyed in Kyle Blackstone's reckless crash had become the catalyst for a transformation that affected hundreds of people. Its destruction had ultimately led to justice for multiple families and the creation of a stronger, more equitable community. Sarah took her seat in the community center, surrounded by neighbors who now looked to her as a leader and inspiration. She had never intended to become a symbol of resistance against powerful bullies, but she was proud of what her courage had accomplished. The truth had indeed prevailed, and Sarah Martinez had learned that sometimes the most important victories come from simply refusing to be silenced by those who think their wealth and power put them above the law.